All right, so today we're going to tackle, I don't know, kind of like a philosophical Everest,
Oh, wow.
Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
Yeah,
And you've shared with me like a really, really in-depth look at his life and his work. Yeah, I
absolutely.
think our mission here is to pull out those key insights, like those aha moments,
Yep.
and maybe even uncover some head scratchers along the way,
I love it. I love it.
kind of like a cheat sheet to understanding this giant of thought.
Yeah, I think cute sheet is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
You know, the material you've given me, it really paints this rich picture of Hegel.
Yeah.
It takes us all the way from his birth in 1770
Oh.
up to his death in 1831. And, we're going to be tracing his journey, his personal life, but really zeroing in on those core philosophical ideas. And of course, setting it all against the backdrop of, a truly world-changing period in history.
I mean, talk about a time to be alive, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's
he's seeing the French Revolution unfold.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
seeing the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
And all of the changes that come with that.
And these aren't just like, oh, things happening in the background.
Right,
These things are
exactly.
like actively shaping his thinking.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think it'll be really interesting to trace, like you mentioned, we'll look at his personal life, but how about like his reaction to the French Revolution initially and how his perspective on that changed sometimes pretty drastically throughout his life.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge right off the bat
Yeah.
that Hegel's philosophy, it's not exactly a walk in the park, right?
Right.
It's pretty challenging stuff.
Yeah.
And even some of the brightest minds of his time, guys like Schopenhauer,
Oh, yeah.
they weren't exactly shy about, let's just say, their very strong opinions on his work.
Right.
So we're not going to shy away from that complexity,
Yeah.
but we are going to try to focus in on those key elements, those things that really help us understand why his ideas, are still so relevant today, hundreds of years later.
So, okay, so how about this?
Yeah.
The heart of this deep dive is like getting a grip on those core ideas of his philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, everyone's always talking about the Hegelian dialectic.
Right.
So we want to see how his own life
Absolutely.
and the crazy time period that he lived in, how all of that shaped this massively influential system of thought that he came up with.
Yeah,
And of course, like you said, we're going to look at his personal life.
we have to. Yeah.
We'll peek behind the curtain, see if there's anything surprising or contradictory going on there, and look at the legacy that he left behind.
Absolutely.
All that good stuff.
I think a good place to start, as with most of these, is at the beginning.
Okay.
So let's look at, Hegel's early life and those key influences that really shaped the man that he became.
Yeah.
So he was born in Stuttgart in 1770.
Okay.
And I think this is a really interesting time because, Kant is just starting to make a name for himself in the world of philosophy.
And we're also seeing kind of the first signs of romanticism.
Right, right.
So it's a really interesting time for him to come of age intellectually.
Okay. And what about his family?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about, his upbringing a little bit.
Yeah.
Did that play a role?
He came from a family that was very rooted in public service.
Okay.
And so I think that really instilled in him from an early age, this really strong sense of order
Uh-huh.
and even discretion.
Yeah.
Like almost this belief in the importance of institutions.
Oh, okay.
So that's definitely something that's worth noting.
So it's almost like that provided the foundation for like his later desire for systems and
Well-
for, order and those sorts of things.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, to think about how
Yeah.
our earliest experiences can have such a profound impact on the way we see the world.
Yeah, totally.
And on top of that family background.
He also had a pretty rough start in life.
Oh, yeah.
He survived smallpox.
Oh, wow.
He lost his mother when he was very young
Oh,
and even had to battle malaria.
goodness.
So, all of these early experiences with vulnerability,
Right.
I think they probably played a role in shaping his worldview.
Yeah.
And I think it's possible that they contributed to his later desire for a system that offered like this sense of completeness and order
Right.
in the face of all of the uncertainty and the chaos of life.
Yeah, like a counterbalance
Yeah,
to
exactly.
the difficult things that he went through.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those early years, I think, are really important.
Yeah. And we also talked about the fact that, like, very early on, he was super dedicated to learning.
Totally.
Like, I mean, this detail about his factory of quotations
Oh, yeah.
is kind of wild.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's like he was just, I mean, meticulously copying excerpts into this huge collection of quotes and passages. And
It paints a picture of him even then trying to synthesize and categorize all of this information.
yeah, and like, it wasn't just basic note-taking. It was
Uh-huh.
like, it speaks to this nascent drive that he had
Absolutely.
to see the connections
Yeah.
between things and to build this framework of knowledge,
Totally.
which of course becomes like the hallmark of his later philosophical system.
Yeah, he was clearly a system builder from a very young age.
Yeah, and the sheer range of things that he was interested in.
I know.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just philosophy, right? It was
Yeah.
it was history, it was literature, it was
Yeah.
religion, you know?
It was, like you said earlier, almost like general trivia.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
Yeah.
he had this insatiable need to categorize
Right.
and to absorb information.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And and it's also interesting to see how that need to categorize kind of extended to his personal relationships as well.
Oh, really?
So, for example, he had this very, very close bond with his sister Christiane.
Well,
And this led him to develop this whole idea of sisterly love being the most elevated form of affection,
wow.
which he later linked to the figure of Antigone.
Okay, so he's already like taking these personal relationships
Right.
and elevating them to these grand philosophical principles.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's pretty intense.
Yeah, and and I think, as we learn more about Christiane later on,
Yeah.
it kind of casts a bit of a poignant and maybe even a little bit of an unsettling light
Oh, yeah.
on that early idealization.
Okay. And what happens later on? I mean, I guess we don't have to spoil it entirely, but
Well, I think it's safe to say that, his intense connection with his sister
Yeah.
ultimately had some pretty significant and ultimately tragic consequences for her.
oh, wow.
So, that's something that we can explore a little bit later on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So,
But so after his kind of his early years,
Yeah.
he goes off to university
okay.
and he goes to Tübingen and initially, his intention was to join the church.
Okay.
But, as so often happens, I think when we go off to university, our
Yeah.
horizons are expanded and,
Yeah.
and he really starts to get exposed to all sorts of new ideas
Okay.
and really begins to engage with philosophy in a really serious way.
And he meets some pretty interesting people.
He does. He
Huh.
does. He
Yeah.
meets Hölderlin,
Hölderlin, the poet.
the great poet, the passionate admirer of ancient Greece.
Right. And Schelling.
Yeah.
With his philosophies of nature.
Yeah. So it's this really interesting trio.
That's a dynamic group right there.
Yeah.
Really dynamic group.
We talked about that image of them like planting a liberty tree to
Oh, yeah.
celebrate the French Revolution. Yeah. So there they are, you know.
Which is pretty striking,
Yeah.
like when you consider his later views on things.
Right.
It's almost like you're seeing this idealistic young man who's revolution.
Totally.
And then later he's confronted by the complexity and the potential chaos of the real world.
Yeah.
And kind of shifts gears and looks for order and those things.
It's almost like he lived through the dialectic himself.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and speaking of Kant,
Yeah.
one of the real turning points for Hegel at university
Okay.
is when he really starts to dig into Kant's work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in particular the critique of pure reason.
All right. Yeah.
So, he really saw Kant as offering this solution to Hume's skepticism.
Okay, I got to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'm not a philosopher.
Right.
I need
Okay.
the for dummies version
Yeah.
of all
This. So Hume basically said we can't really know for sure if one thing causes another.
Okay.
Right. He was a real skeptic.
Right.
But Kant came along and said, no. Our minds are actually structured in a way that creates that experience of causality.
Oh.
So it's not that the world is causing things, it's that our minds are set up to perceive it that way.
Oh, okay.
And Hegel took that idea and ran with it.
Okay.
He said, this mental structuring, it's not just subjective, it's actually reflecting the underlying structure of reality itself.
So it's like our minds are kind of a microcosm.
Exactly.
The bigger picture.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a really, really major moment in German philosophy. And Hegel was, he was clearly captivated by the ambition and the scope of what Kant was trying to do.
Yeah, he definitely seemed to be drawn to like that really comprehensive approach that Kant had.
The system building.
Yeah. Even if Kant himself wasn't always the clearest writer.
Right, exactly.
It's funny though, like you think, okay, this guy's immersed in philosophy.
Yeah.
He's clearly brilliant.
Yeah.
He gets his final diploma and it's not great.
It's pretty mediocre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they even noted that he wasn't that good at philosophy.
Yeah, which is pretty funny when you consider what he went on to do.
Yeah.
But I think what that really underscores is that, there's a difference between kind of formal academic achievement and genuine intellectual exploration.
Right.
Right. So Hegel's real education, it wasn't happening in the classroom.
Right.
It was happening outside of the classroom. It was happening in his reading, in his thinking, in the development of his own ideas.
Okay, so it's almost like formal education was like the thesis.
Yeah, I like that.
And then his own personal intellectual development was the antithesis.
Exactly.
Leading to,
a synthesis, a Hegelian synthesis.
Yeah, okay, so he graduates, he gets this kind of so-so diploma, and what's next?
So he ends up taking a job as a private tutor in Bern, Switzerland.
Okay.
And, it's a pretty isolated existence, but he does seem to find some solace in nature.
Oh, okay.
But even his appreciation for nature is kind of tinged with this melancholy.
Really?
Yeah. So for example, his reaction to the Alps.
Okay.
He describes them as being eternally dead.
Eternally dead.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whereas he talks about, a waterfall embodying freedom.
Oh, okay.
So it's an interesting contrast, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a stark contrast.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it offers, maybe a little bit of a glimpse into his inner emotional landscape.
Right, right.
And this psychologist Scharfstein, he suggested that maybe those frozen peaks for Hegel, they kind of represented the painful immobility of depression.
Oh, yeah.
And the waterfall, that was the pleasure of kind of freeing himself from that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And this actually resonates with some of the later accounts we have of his struggles with depression.
Right. So it's like this underlying emotional complexity that maybe isn't always apparent when you're just reading his philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And so during this time, he's still influenced by Kant.
Okay.
And he writes these early religious writings.
Oh.
And this is really fascinating because one of the things he does, he writes this secularized life of Christ.
A secularized life of Christ.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine, he's trying to...
I can't imagine.
To grapple with religious thought.
Right.
Through this very Kantian framework.
Right.
It's almost kind of, I don't know.
A little awkward.
A little awkward, yeah.
Like trying to fit, the profound simplicity of Jesus into this, convoluted Prussian philosophy.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like a strange combination.
It does. But, I think it just goes to show that he was on this intellectual journey.
Yeah.
Right? He was trying to synthesize different schools of thought.
Yeah.
And figure out how they all fit together.
Okay. And then what about this? I mean, we talked about him trying to suppress.
Oh, yeah. And that's actually really telling.
Yeah.
The fact that later on, he actually regretted these writings.
Okay.
And he tried to destroy them.
Oh, wow.
That indicates to me that, there was a really significant shift in his views.
So it's almost like he was trying to erase that part of his development.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so it's almost like he's still figuring things out during this period.
He's very much a work in progress at this point.
Okay, and then we get to this mystical experience in Frankfurt. So what was going on there?
So this seems to have been a real turning point for him.
Okay.
And it's possible that he was influenced by Spinoza during this time.
Okay.
But he has this vision of this fundamental unity in the cosmos, where all of these apparent divisions are ultimately kind of illusory.
Okay.
And this vision seems to have been the seed from which his entire philosophical system grew.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting, to contrast Spinoza, who had this very, very, very structured, almost mathematical system,
Right.
with Hegel's, which is much more organic
Well,
and some might say, less clear
Yeah.
way of articulating that underlying unity.
okay, so it's almost like the same basic idea,
Yeah.
but expressed in two totally different ways.
Totally different styles.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for Spinoza, the universe was governed by this absolute logical necessity.
Okay.
Right.
And all of the things that we perceive as negative or as contingent or as random, that's just because of our limited perspective.
Oh, okay.
But Hegel, he took that basic insight, but he articulated it in this much more, I don't know, poetic way.
Yeah, less structured.
Less structured, yeah.
Okay, so is this what really propels him to say, all right, I'm done with all this other stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm gonna focus on philosophy.
Yeah, this is when he really dedicates himself fully to philosophy.
Okay.
He sets aside poetry.
Oh, wow.
He actually stops keeping his comprehensive diary,
Oh, well.
which he had kept for years and years, and he
Uh-huh.
really focuses on this massive project of trying to articulate this mystical insight that he had,
Right.
but to articulate it in rational terms.
Okay, so it's like he had this really powerful experience.
Right.
And he's like, how do I take this and make it make sense to other people?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to create a system that could encompass this vision.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's really the true beginning of the Hegelian system.
Right, so it's all coming together now.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And, even from the beginning,
Yeah.
you can hear those echoes of Spinoza in his work.
Okay.
Right. Even though he's filtering them through this very different style.
Yeah.
So Spinoza, he aimed for this kind of almost geometric clarity in his writing.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But Hegel, even in these early attempts to systematize his thought, he was leaning more towards this Kantian kind of complexity.
Right. So even though he's drawing inspiration from Spinoza,
Yeah.
it's still filtered through that Kantian lens.
Exactly. But I think what Spinoza showed him was that there were these possibilities in philosophy
Okay.
that went beyond the very defined, almost rigid boundaries of Kant's system.
Okay. So it's opening up his
He's opening him up
his
here.
thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So around this time,
Yeah.
his father passes away,
okay.
and Hegel inherits a little bit of money.
Okay.
Not a ton, but enough
Enough to do what he needs to do.
to kind of eke out a modest living,
Yeah.
with good beer,
Okay. Essential.
essential, and
Yeah.
of course a decent library.
Okay.
The essentials for a philosopher. Exactly.
Uh-huh.
So this inheritance allows him to move to Jena
Oh.
and crucially to connect with Schelling,
Okay.
who is really like a rising star in the world of philosophy at this time.
All right. So he's getting into the right circles now.
Yeah, absolutely. He's making connections.
Okay.
And so Schelling welcomes him to Jena,
All right.
and Hegel becomes a private dozent.
Okay. What is a private dozen?
So basically, it's a lecturer
Okay.
who gets paid directly by their students.
Oh, wow.
So it's a pretty precarious existence.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
It is.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, only a handful of students
Okay.
showed up to his lectures.
Oh, so they weren't exactly.
Not exactly a hit.
Yeah. Okay, and was this because, I mean, he had a reputation for being a little bit, I don't know,
Well, it's funny.
dense.
Yeah, so his lectures
Yeah.
were apparently
Yeah.
just as dense and impenetrable
Right.
as his written work.
Okay.
Which is pretty amusing,
Yeah.
when you consider that Kant was actually renowned for being a really engaging lecturer.
Right. Yeah.
So
Two different approaches.
very different approaches.
Okay.
And, it seems like Hegel was really developing his grand system in real time.
Oh, okay.
He was using his students as a sounding board.
So it's like they were getting in on the ground floor.
They were.
This whole thing.
Yeah, and there's this great description from
Yeah.
one of his admirers
Okay.
who talks about his lectures being, hesitant at first, but then ultimately really profound for those who were dedicated enough to stick with it.
Okay. Okay. I'm trying to imagine like sitting in one of these lectures and being like,
Oh,
what is going on right now?
yeah.
But also like
Yeah.
maybe having that moment where it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Right, the light bulb goes off.
I think I'm starting to see what he's getting at.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And John at the time, it was a really Really interesting place to be.
Oh, yeah. It was like a real hub.
It was a hub of intellectual activity.
Yeah.
You know, people like Schiller and the Schlegel brothers and Volley.
Right.
They had all been there.
Right.
And they were really contributing to the Romantic movement and also to the development of post-Kantian philosophy.
Right.
So it was a really, really vibrant time.
So it's like, even though those specific figures weren't there when Hegel was there,
Right.
it's like their ideas were still kind of
it was in the air.
hanging in the air.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, Schelling was there,
Right.
and his philosophy of nature was a huge draw for students.
Okay.
And as we go on, we're going to see that this actually leads to a bit of friction between Schelling and Hegel.
Okay, so we've got this rivalry brewing.
Yeah, there's a bit of a rivalry brewing.
Yeah.
And their philosophical paths start to diverge.
Okay, so it's like they're both starting from the same place.
Yeah.
But then they're kind of going
their separate ways.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which I think was probably inevitable, right?
Yeah.
You've got these two really brilliant minds working on similar problems,
Yeah.
but they're going to come up with different solutions.
Right, okay.
And despite the fact that his audience is growing a little bit,
Yeah.
Hegel is still struggling financially.
Okay.
And he just refuses to make his lectures more accessible. So it's like he knows what he wants to say.
He does.
And he's going to say it.
He's not going to compromise.
Whether people get it or not.
Yeah, he's committed to the truth as he sees it.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like he's developing his grand system in real time.
Okay.
He's using his students as this sounding board.
You look at a live experiment.
It is.
Okay, and so, how are people responding to this?
So it's mixed, right? I mean, some people are totally turned off.
Right.
But then there are these others who are just drawn to him.
Okay.
And there's this one description from one of his admirers.
Okay.
That talks about, the way that Hegel lectured, and he said it was hesitant, kind of halting, but then ultimately really profound.
Right.
So you can imagine these lectures kind of meandering, going off on these tangents.
Right.
But then all of a sudden
there's this flash of insight.
Yeah.
And it all kind of comes together.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very interesting and unique style.
Yeah, it's not your typical PowerPoint presentation type of lecture.
Definitely not.
Okay, but thankfully someone recognizes his potential and appeals to Goethe, right?
Yeah.
For an appointment.
Absolutely.
So he gets this new position.
Yeah, so he's appointed as Professor Extraordinarius.
What is that?
So
guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.